Jesus Christ. Amen. Commonly understood, an epiphany, according to the dictionary, is a moment of sudden revelation or insight. We are in the midst, as we speak this Sunday, in the middle of the season that we call Epiphany, the season between Christmas and Lent, the season that highlights the wise men coming from the east and seeing the baby Jesus. They had a moment of sudden revelation. They saw the star rising and they followed it to where Jesus was, and then they had insight. They saw that Jesus was the real deal. Jesus was the real king. They bent a knee. They worshiped him, as the Bible tells us. Commonly understood, an epiphany is still that same thing. It's a moment of sudden revelation or insight. And if you watched last Sunday's football game, the only football game worth watching last week, there were all kinds of things that happened at the end of that game that provide us with epiphanies about our faith. And the epiphany started with about 25 seconds left in the game. I will not ask for a raise of hands. Was there anybody who didn't see the end of that football game? Because if you didn't, it was amazing. 25 seconds left in the game. New Orleans has just taken the lead. Will Lutz, their place kicker, has kicked a field goal. Saints are up, and for all intents and purposes, it's game over. Thank you, Vikings, for a great season, but you are done. At that point, we don't know it as we're watching the broadcast. We find out starting on Monday and Tuesday that at that point that Will Lutz kicks the go-ahead field goal, the head coach of the Saints, Sean Payton, turns around to some of the fans behind him and starts to do the skull clap, not in a supportive way. Vikings get the ball back. 39-yard line, 10 seconds left to go, and what happens? You know exactly what happens. Diggs disappears into the tunnel. The team goes and mobs him. The field is cleared of media because the media has gone out and said, game over. Oh no, says the NFL, you must kick the point after. You have to. You cannot end the game even in a walk-off touchdown for 6 points. You've got to do something. So what ends up happening is you've got all this media out on the field, interviews are already starting, and the officials are saying, no, guys, you've got to clear the field. We still have to do the point after. And so the Saints have already dejectedly marched off to the locker room, and they start filing out, a few of them, led by their punter, Thomas Morstead. The Minneapolis Miracle ends up happening. And at that point, after that, Case Keenum is interviewed. And it is in that amount of time, from 25 seconds of game clock until Case Keenum is interviewed, that I will submit to you that there were no fewer than 4 epiphanies that we can glean about our faith. First thing that happened goes back to Coach Payton's leading of the skull chant, if that's what you want to call it. Coach Payton, according to news reports this week, apparently had been goaded on by some Vikings fans. And so, with 25 seconds left in the game, said, come on guys, what are the chances? Game's over. And so apparently, having been goaded on by fans, he turned around in a mocking gesture and started to do the skull chant, saying, see you next year, buddy. Here's the thing. From our first reading for this morning, Ecclesiastes 7:9, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. We know the outcome. What's the old sports cliche, folks? Game's not over till it's over. Until the clock says 0, 0, 0. Coach Payton fell for one of the oldest things in the book, right? 25 seconds left. What are the chances? All it takes is 1. And what Coach Payton ended up doing was he ended up falling for this. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. And the first epiphany that we can take from the end of that game is that it doesn't matter if Coach was goaded on by fans or not. We can say the devil made me do it, and is that an excuse? No. Coach Payton surely has been goaded on by fans before. Every coach in the NFL has been goaded, mocked, ridiculed by fans before. What do you got to do, folks? You deal with it, right? Because what happens? Your reaction, your mockery, or your quick temper never leads to anything good and constructive. Ask the religious leaders who stood at the foot of the cross as Jesus was being crucified. He saved himself, or he saved others. Why doesn't he save himself? They mocked Jesus. They ridiculed Jesus. They thought it was game over. And guess what? It wasn't. Now, fortunately for them, Jesus rose again from the dead and brought what to these folks? Forgiveness. A second chance. But they were mocking Jesus, effectively doing the biblical version of a mocking skull clap when there was still time left on the clock. And so the first thing I think we can glean about our faith is that we are very, very wise to never get too haughty, to never get too full of ourselves, to never be too sure that someone else is left out of God's forgiveness, or that we mock others, because of mockery and a quick temper never leads to anything good or constructive. Epiphany number 2 is basically a part A and a part B. It's two sides of the same coin. And it starts with Thomas Morstead's return to the field after the winning touchdown. Thomas Morstead, the punter for the Saints, he had, I believe it was first quarter, he had suffered a pretty bad injury tackling Marcus Sherrills. You guys maybe saw that play where he had punted the ball, Marcus Sherrills ripped off a really good return, and who was there to finally take him down? Thomas Morstead. By the way, I've seen punters try to tackle guys on returns before. What Thomas Morstead did was a stick, right? That was a tackle. And he ended up ripping cartilage in his rib cage as a result. He thought he'd broken ribs. And so he comes out, he plays the rest of the game, punts a few more times, and when the officials finally said, you've got to send players back out onto the field to line up to do this point after Diggs scored the winning touchdown, who was the first person from the Saints to come out back on the field? It wasn't a lineman. It wasn't a defensive back. It wasn't even a wide receiver. It was the punter. It was Thomas Morstead. And so it was strange to watch that point after, because here's number 6, a number that doesn't line up on the line, lining up to go ahead and allow this point after to happen. Guys, this is the epitome of what sportsmanship looks like. What Thomas Morstead did, set aside that he played through an injury, that's not what sportsmanship is. The fact that despite his injury, despite his pain, he still was the guy who was first out of the tunnel for his team to complete the game. That, my friends, was the epitome of sportsmanship, and a direct contrast, the exact opposite of what his head coach had done just a few seconds before. Amen? 2B is the flip side of the same coin. And after that extra point is tried, after Diggs is being mobbed in the tunnel, according to Ben Lieber this week on KFan, while everyone was mobbing Diggs in the tunnel, where was Adam Thielen? He wasn't with the rest of his teammates mobbing Diggs. Lieber saw Thielen walk across the field and start congratulating the Saints for a good game. So it goes back to, next slide, guys. Epiphany number 2. First verse of our first reading for this morning says, a good name is better than fine perfume. There is something to illuminate our faith. A good name is what we are called to bear into the world in the name of Jesus Christ. In arguably the most significant moment in recent sports history, what did each of these guys display? It was miraculous. It was one of those sports moments for the ages. And what each of those guys displayed in that moment was poise, it was tact, it was a respect for the game and for their opponents that we don't always get to see. And so Epiphany number 2 that we can glean from last Sunday's game is exactly what the writer of Ecclesiastes says. A good name is much, much better than fine perfume. A little footnote to Epiphany number 2. Thomas Morstead being the first back onto the field for that point after was not lost on Vikings. Thomas Morstead started a charity foundation down in New Orleans some years ago called What You Give Will Grow. And one Vikings fan went out to Reddit and started a petition to get money from Vikings fans to go to Thomas Morstead's charity as a way to say, hey, you were noticed for what you did. As of Sunday afternoon, that charity had been given about $2,000 by Vikings fans. By Wednesday, when I pulled the data, it was up to $47,000. Thomas Morstead said this week that if he raised $100,000, that he would fly up here to Minneapolis to give all of that money to Minneapolis children as a way to say thank you to Vikings fans. By the way, guys, I checked this morning. That $47,000, you know how much it's grown to today? $200,000. A good name, my friend, is better than fine perfume. Thomas Morstead is not about himself. Adam Thielen is not about himself. What these guys are doing goes well beyond the football field, but it is precisely on the football field that we saw the tact, the poise, the tenacity that a good name carries. Thomas Morstead is coming back up here in another week or two, right before the Super Bowl, to hand a $200,000 and growing check to Minneapolis Children's to bless them. And by the way, that particular fundraiser for Children's is something that Thomas Morstead then this week turned around and started a fundraiser for Children's Hospital in New Orleans. And let's be fair. Who was one of the first people to give a $25,000 gift to that particular fundraiser? Coach Payton. Let's give Coach a little bit of credit where credit is due. Good name is better than fine perfume. Epiphany number 3, Marcus Williams and the whiff. Marcus Williams, safety. Last play of the game, you know what I'm talking about. Stephon Diggs catches the ball. Marcus Williams is charging hard, and Marcus Williams, for some inexplicable reason, decides that he's going to duck his head and never ends up making contact with Diggs. Worse yet, by ducking his head and by diving, he ends up taking out his other teammate who could have possibly made a play on Diggs. Immediate aftermath, we are told that Marcus Williams goes into the Saints locker room and absolutely sobs. Absolutely is despondent over what's happened. And people immediately start to ask the question, how could he have let that happen? This is textbook football 101. You've got a situation like that, you've got to keep Diggs in bounds, and you've got to tackle him. That ends the game right there. Saints go on to the NFC Championship game. Why didn't he do it? Why didn't he let up on the gas a little bit, keep his head up, and as soon as Diggs caught the ball, then wrap him up, bring him to the ground, and it's game over? How could he have done that? Lately, in our culture, we have been using the phrase GOAT to refer to the greatest of all time. When we think of people who've done amazing things, we call them GOATs, greatest of all time. Unfortunately for Marcus Williams, he has been referred to as a GOAT, if you will, but not in the more contemporary understanding of the word. For many of us, GOAT doesn't mean greatest of all time. It means the person who is to blame for something bad. And Marcus Williams this week has been looked at and been blamed for the Saints having lost their chance at a Super Bowl. But here's the thing. Immediately after the game, the Fox News post-game crew comes on, Howie Long, Michael Strahan, Jimmy Johnson, Terry Bradshaw, those guys. And immediately what they did was they said, look, you've got to understand that what he was probably worried about was not committing pass interference. Because if he interfered in any way with Diggs catching the ball and got in his way, you can't end the game on a penalty, and that would have set up the Vikings to kick a game-winning field goal. The Fox crew, immediately following the game, got it right. They tried to put some reasonable explanation as to why Marcus Williams would have done what he did. And they got it right, my friends. Because for this poor guy, who, as these guys are being broadcast, are telling us, don't put it all on Marcus Williams is despondent in the locker room. He feels as if the weight of that game is on his shoulders, and the post-game crew says, no. There's a reason for it. Even later on, Coach Peyton, Manti Te'o, came out publicly and said, look, guys, it's not his fault. It's one play. Now, again, that sounds maybe a little bit stereotypical, kind of boilerplate, cliche, not his fault, it's team game and so forth. But I think it was really an effort to say, look, a lot of people are mad at this guy, and we need to lighten up on this poor guy. He was probably trying to avoid something that would have created a sure opportunity for the Vikings to kick a game-winning field goal. And this goes back to what Peter says in our second reading for today. Finally, all of you be like-minded. And here's the thing, my friends. Be sympathetic. Love one another. Be compassionate and humble. Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. Marcus Williams has gotten, from what I heard this week, a number of people who on social media have ripped him for losing that game for the Saints. Lighten up, people. He was doing what he was doing, and in that split second, he made a decision how to make that play. Had he done it one way, he'd have been a GOAT in the classic sense because he allowed the Vikings to set up a game-winning field goal. He did it the way he did, and you know what? Stephon Diggs caught an amazing pass and had the wherewithal to turn around and go, there's no one in front of me, and scored a touchdown. Marcus Williams can't do anything right in either of those situations. We, my dear friends, it is an epiphany for us in our faith to realize that when we run into these situations where people do things that we just go, what was he thinking? We must caution ourselves. We must be, as Peter says, sympathetic. We got to love one another. We got to be compassionate and humble. We got to give people a break. And at the end of the day, my friends, it's a football game. It's entertainment. It's fun. But Epiphany 4, I think, is the one that has the most bearing on our faith. Case Keenum, Stephon Diggs, and the rest of the Vikings have done the miraculous. And now the media is back out on the field. They have taken a knee for the extra point. Game over. Media is back on the field. Chris Myers from the telecast is now interviewing Case Keenum. And he's talking to him about how the game went, what he thought, which obviously how it went. Keenum eventually says, this was the third best moment in my life. And he riddles off the reason why it's the third best. The third best moment in his life was that particular play, playing in that game. The second one was marrying his wife, Kimberly. And the first was giving my life to Jesus Christ. If you saw that live, it was a pretty impressive thing. And as a person of Christian faith, I sat there and went, good on you, Case Keenum. Case Keenum stood there in the most important moment of his professional life, and he was prepared with an answer. Epiphany number 4. Peter says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. Be prepared. I don't know about you if you saw that, but when I watched Keenum, that was not an ad hoc, off the top of his head kind of answer. He was ready. That answer that he gave was polished. And when he offered it, it was something that, at least to me, sounds like he had been thinking about for quite a while. It was too easily delivered. Case Keenum, I would argue, was prepared to give an answer when the opportunity came, and was prepared to give an answer for the reason that he has hope in anything. With gentleness and respect, that is to say, with gentleness and respect towards others and for God. Case Keenum throws out this witness to his Christian faith, and what does Chris Myers do? Lets it go. What can Chris Myers do? Chris Myers is a journalist. He's not supposed to take sides. He's interviewing after a game. And what Case Keenum did right there was offered his testimony with gentleness and respect towards Chris Meyer, but for the glory of God. He didn't say to Chris Meyer, and Chris Meyer, what do you think right now? Okay? He simply put it out there and let it linger. He did it with gentleness and with respect. Revere Christ. When Peter says that, what he literally is saying is to revere Christ is to acknowledge Christ as being worthy of being venerated. Folks, here's the most amazing thing. In Case Keenum's biggest moment of his professional career, and we all know the story, Case Keenum has certainly had his downs, more downs, and a few ups in his professional career. In his biggest, greatest moment of his professional career, where does Case Keenum rank his accomplishment in comparison to what Christ has done for him? It doesn't even make the top two. His accomplishment pales in comparison to marrying his wife Kimberly and to what Christ has done for him. And the most amazing thing, brothers and sisters, is when he was given an opportunity to do it, Case Keenum didn't shy away from that opportunity. He embraced that opportunity to bear witness to Jesus Christ in that moment. Tongue in cheek, as your Packer fan pastor, I wanted for us to sing On Eagle's Wings today. It's in the hymn. I could have picked it. I was going to pick it, and I thought, ah. So we did stand up for Jesus instead. As your pastor, who happens to be a Packer fan, the reason why I didn't pick On Eagle's Wings in large part, there's too much to respect from that game last week. There's too much for us to learn about our Christian faith from those 25 seconds of game clock and the few minutes in the aftermath of that game. What people like Adam Thielen, Thomas Morstead, Case Keenum, what these men did at the end of a football game was amazing testimony to their Christian faith and to what the Lord is doing in our midst. And so, may the epiphanies from last Sunday continue on today. 5:40, I'm going to be plunked down in front of my TV, ready to watch a good football game. Looking forward to the opportunity as the league progresses to take what these men have modeled, put it into my Christian faith, and bear that witness to the world as well. The Lord be with you. Amen. I'd like you all to please stand.